Good night, everybody. This is the feed to Embiid. I am your host, Austin Krell, along with my co-host, Brock. Brock, how are we today?
I'm doing well. It's always good when you don't have to start the episode with a personal dig or anything going on in my personal life. So I'm glad we could keep the conversation about basketball this time.
There we go.
But we've got a fun episode today, Austin. So enlighten our listeners.
Yeah, I think with the rumors about the season beginning in late December instead of January or even like February or March, I think it's we're going to see an uptick and maybe a much more quicker pace to free agency. So I thought we would, and maybe some of the off-season activity. So I thought it would be worth just kind of spitballing around some trade ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So before we get started, do want to issue a disclaimer to the listeners and the viewers. Again, and speaking of, you guys can leave comments, ask questions, whatever, engage with us. We're always eager to talk with you guys during the show and whatnot. And give us a 5-star review or rating, and then a review, and subscribe on Apple Pods at the Feed to Embiid. We always appreciate all the support we can get. But quick disclaimer: this is not us reporting rumors or anything. This is just merely throwing ideas and seeing how we would feel, and maybe evaluating each from the standpoint of both teams that are involved in said trade scenario. So, without further ado, we shall begin. Brock, do you want to give one and I'll give one, or do you want me to give my 5 and then you give yours? How do you want to do it?
Yeah, let's go one for one.
Okay.
That way we can see different perspectives.
Okay.
I know you and I we chatted briefly before the podcast. I saw you weren't too happy that I sent you my trades because it was supposed to be a surprise. So I went back and I made 4 or 5 more in the trade machine. So I've got some surprises, but I'll start off with a really low floor trade with a high reward, in my opinion. And of course, you gave the disclaimer. There are no rumors these are going to happen, and this is just spitballing. But I started in the Eastern Conference, and I went after Evan Fournier in Orlando. And I threw in a pick just because I didn't want to seem like Philadelphia was giving too much for just Fournier. So in this trade, the Sixers would acquire him. 1 year on his contract left, $17 million, and it's a player option and a 2020 second round. But on the other end, Philadelphia ships to Orlando Raul Neto, who's just a cap filler because his contract expired. So we just threw him in there to fill the cap. Josh Richardson, Furkan Korkmaz, and a 2020 second from Philadelphia via Atlanta. So in my opinion, I think this is a trade that benefits Philadelphia really well. You get a guy who's multidimensional in the half court, obviously a more reputable shooter than Furkan Korkmaz, and I think in terms of what he can bring to the offense, he provides a little more flexibility than Josh Richardson, and defensively, you can make up for that. So I think Philadelphia nabs Prosper out of Orlando's department, their scouting department, and maybe they get the phones ringing and trade and potentially acquire Evan Fournier. What do you think?
So just to recap, Evan Fournier, Josh, Raul Neto, and what else was it?
Korkmaz, Bomber. Depending on who you ask. And then, of course, the second round is out there.
I think it makes it a lot easier for Orlando to accept, because Fournier isn't expiring, and I don't envision them bringing him back because, he's going to want probably around 18, 20 mil. I would think, and he's been pretty bad in the playoffs a couple of years in a row. So, that is a very strong argument against the case of giving him that kind of money. So I think Orlando is compelled to maybe try to change things up, because I think with him averaging 19 points per game and basically being one of their 3 primary scorers, their ceiling as a franchise is pretty low. I don't know that they can get past the 7 seed, really. Certainly barring the injury of an opponent, can't get out of the first round of the playoffs. So I think that it is worth changing up. I think Josh and Cork and Howell Neto. I don't even think they can trade Howell Neto unless it's a sign and trade.
No, they couldn't. He was just a cap hold there just to make the trade work on the trade proposal machine. But you can update that with picks or players sign and trade.
I think the Magic probably would do that.
Okay, so we'll go
do that.
We'll go one for one.
And I think the Sixers would definitely do that too.
I think it's a low risk, high reward type of trade, and
yeah.
You can bring back the production offensively. Go ahead.
Now, I have a similar trade. Okay. I have the Sixers getting Fournier.
Okay.
Magic get Josh, because I think Josh is going to be used in some way to unload some money, or just to used as like the primary, I guess, roster controlled asset in a trade with like a team that isn't that great. To get, like an expiring back, whatever. So Josh, Matisse.
Oh, okay.
Mike Scott.
3-player, okay.
And a 2020 second round pick via the Knicks. So basically, what?
That was just all for Fournier?
Yeah, and so here's my logic. I think it kind of works in it's like a 2-part trade that I think works, because Fournier's salary is huge. So like Josh and Matisse are sort of like this is your return for giving us Fournier. And so that's sort of, I think it's pretty equal, Josh and Matisse for Fournier. Then it's, oh wait, we're going to also ask you to take on Mike Scott to fill out, to make that money work, and then thus freeing up 4.8 to 5 mil, off of his contract. And we'll even pay you to take on Mike Scott by giving you a second round pick. So it kind of works. It kind of works in 2 different ways. You see what I'm saying there? So basically, it's like a multi-purpose, multi-dimensional trade. Okay. I think the Magic would definitely do that.
Yeah, without a doubt. The reason why I'd be hesitant to do that is because with Fournier expiring, and we already talked about the money being problematic, giving Fournier $18-19+ million on a per season basis, I think you could get away with giving Korkmaz, Richardson in the third, because like I said, you can bring back that offensive production. But I think the ceiling of Thibault, and given his age and the roster control they have with him right now, that would be a little too much to give up for Fournier. But I did include Thibault in a trade for Victor Oladipo. I know that Indiana has made it public that Victor Oladipo would be available via a trade offer they can't pass up, and Philadelphia also expressed interest. And I'm looking at Indiana, and I'm like, Indiana's paying Turner, they're paying Sabonis, Doug McDermott's a power forward, TJ Leaf. There's a crowded host of forwards and centers on that team. Why the hell would Indiana want Al Horford? And more specifically, for Victor Oladipo. So that's why I put a guy like Thibault in a trade for Oladipo. I think you could get a tier 3, tier 4 NBA player on the brink of being a star for maybe Thibault's potential. But for Fournier, I wouldn't trade Thibault.
Okay. Well, so with the Indiana thing, it's an interesting thing. I think people yesterday saw Michael Kasky-Blomain's tweet about like the Sixers could look at him. I think they could, but I also think he's sort of at an impasse, because his market in his mind should be a lot higher than it is in reality around the NBA. And I think Indiana kind of wants to keep Sabonis at center, or keep him at power forward. Sorry. And so, no, other way around. They want to keep Sabonis at center and not play him at power forward. So I kind of don't see an avenue where it makes sense for them to take on Horford's money. And I think people have to stop overvaluing Matisse Thybulle. Like, he's a really good perimeter defender, but there's a lot of really pretty good high ceiling wing defenders in the NBA, and he gives you next to nothing on offense besides the occasional 3-point shot. And so I just think we can't live in a world where the fan base is up in arms over like any kind of scenario that doesn't involve Thibault. He should be, if that's what it takes to get you off of a contract or to get something that fits here better, while also being an expiring contract. So if it doesn't work out well, then you just cut your losses at the end of the season. you can't hang on to Thibault for that. I
Yeah.
think Fournier is too valuable for
My
one season.
only counterpoint to that would be, so we talk week in and week out about how Philadelphia
Needs the
mismanages
value, yeah.
assets and how they need to nurture these first and second round picks. And then you look at everybody Sixers let go of, like Jeremy Grant, Robert Covington, Darius Saric, Mikal Bridges, all these names. And it's like, at some point, you're going to have to keep and develop one of these guys. You know what I mean?
Right. But by the same token, I would say not being able to do that, not being able to hang on to cheap or to the cost controlled assets is the price that you have to pay for making dog shit decisions
Of course,
in this in free agency recently.
To put it
I
nicely.
Yeah. So I do think that the Magic would absolutely jump at that trade.
Mm-hmm.
Josh, Matisse, Mike Scott, and a second. I don't think that Philly would do it. I don't think the Sixers would do that trade.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's pretty heavy for a guy who is a really good player on like a mediocre team. And so, I don't think that would go through. Yellow Jack Media or Last Out Media says, "Sup, fellows? What's up, guys? Thanks for tuning in." Greeny Green says he wouldn't trade Matisse for Fournier straight up. I don't think you could do that because of the salary differential. Like I think Fournier's making like upwards of $15 million per year, and Thibault's making like what, 2, 3?
Yeah.
And even then, I would do that trade. Like I wouldn't think twice about it.
So
I would trade.
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
absolutely, I would. Brock, give us your second trade.
Yeah. So I explored a lot with trying to dump this man Al Horford's contract, and it hasn't been pretty because you look around the league and it's like, why should anybody give Al Horford or give assets for Al Horford rather? But I came up with one that really intrigues me, and this isn't for a Western Conference team that everybody's talking about in Sacramento to get Buddy Hield. This is actually New Orleans, and this is a trade. I would love if Philadelphia could stage this.
I thought about this. Yeah.
It's just a matter of, is New Orleans willing to take this contract on? There's a lot of guys on their team that are no longer under contract. They have a lot of spots to fill, and specifically there's youth and experience at the forward position. So maybe New Orleans has interest in bringing this contract on, but the trade I ultimately came up with was Al Horford, Josh Richardson, and a 2020 second round from Philadelphia. For the former 76er, Drew Holiday, and a local kid, the former Villanova Wildcat, Josh Hart.
So it's Al, it's Josh Richardson.
Yeah.
For Drew.
And Josh Hart.
See, I think New Orleans can get a much better return for Drew Holiday.
Absolutely.
I think there's a chance they could get Karis LeVert from the Nets. Or maybe even like Spencer Dinwiddie from the Nets for Drew Holiday.
I think with New Orleans, there were rumors that there was going to be a lot of overhaul or overturn, I should say, and the team was maybe going to part ways with Lonzo Ball this offseason. But I think the team's not going to give up on Lonzo yet. I think they really like that Zoe and Zion pairing. And I think if you complain about floor spacing with Ben Simmons and him not shooting the basketball, of course, Lonzo's got the strap. He had a great year shooting the 3-ball, but you saw what happened in the bubble. If he can't hit that shot offensively, he gives you next to nothing other than facilitating or maybe ball handling and kickstarting the offense. But in terms of his individual offensive production, if he can't hit that 3-ball, he doesn't really give you much. So the floor would shrink drastically if Philadelphia traded for Lonzo Ball, in my opinion, at the moment. And I don't think New Orleans is ready to give up on him. They have a new coach there. So I think they're going to try to play around with the culture a little bit before they get rid of Zoe. But Drew Holiday is a guy who I definitely think at this point, making $25 million, expiring contract, getting up there in age, New Orleans would try to flip for some assets. And Austin, you raise a great point. So for Philadelphia, I think they do this trade in a heartbeat for Drew and Josh if they could stage it. But on the other end, New Orleans, I don't think they do it.
So one thing that I think that New Orleans is maybe considering a little more than you think they are is the idea of trading Lonzo. I think number one, he really pissed them off with the way that he was like checked out in the bubble and was like playing like garbage. And then like the fact that he was just like slumming it and chilling by the pool whenever that they weren't like put a bad taste in their mouth. Like, they weren't happy with that about that. So I think that there's sort of some sort of strain in the relationship there. And I also think that they want to re-sign Brandon Ingram.
Yeah.
And if you're going to do that, you probably can't afford to bring back Lonzo if he's going to get 12 to 15 mil per year, I think. So I tend to think that maybe New Orleans would look to get off of his money, because I think that it just makes maybe it doesn't make a lot of sense to like the fans' perspective, or maybe even like someone who isn't closely monitoring the situation. But I tend to think that that's something that could happen for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think it's an interesting scenario. I think people think that Drew is a much better shooter than he is. Like, he wasn't that great of a shooter this year.
Mm-hmm.
Am I wrong? I think
it's true, because he is a pretty pedestrian shooter, but it's everything else he gives you that makes him such a great shooting guard.
For sure. He's like one of the most underrated defenders from the perimeter in the NBA.
Yeah, if not the most.
Yeah, for sure. I like that trade for the Philly. I don't think New Orleans does that trade.
Yeah, the more I think about it, Austin, you just said, the team might explore maybe even dumping Drew Holiday's salary, for example, at $25 million. Yeah. Well, what makes you think they want an older Al Horford who's getting $27 million, so $2 more mil than Drew Holiday, and the only asset you really get back is Josh Richardson?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is something to be said. Like, Stan Van Gundy does, like, like defensive-minded guys like that, like Josh would be, and I think Josh might thrive under a more structured system that Stan can provide. But I don't know. I just think that David Griffin was not happy with the way that he acted in the bubble, and I think they want to pay Brandon Ingram. That's just me. So the next one that I cooked up, which is a pretty simple one, but I think it's helpful to the Sixers in a lot of ways. Sixers receive cash.
I don't like the sound of this. I don't know how this ends.
The Knicks receive Mike Scott.
Okay.
And a 2020 second round pick. I'm
fine with that. I'm absolutely fine with that.
Yeah. So, I mean, the Knicks are going to have like 40+ million in cap space. I mean, I listened to some podcast. I forget, it might have been like the Windhorse Hoop Collective. By the way, have you ever listened to that? It's good content. It's good content, but he just talks over everybody. He interrupts all show.
I'm not a fan of his. He made a profession of stalking LeBron James. So,
well, he's laughing at us because he's sitting where we want to be, right?
True.
But so like they were thinking they wanted to trade for Chris Paul because, I mean, they could absorb his entire contract with their cap space. Like they have 40 million cap. Chris Paul is making 40 mil. So that works. But the Knicks could take on Mike Scott's 4.9 mil, get a second round pick to go with it, stretch it or waive him, whatever. So that way then they don't have to keep on the roster, play him. They just have to pay the contract. The Sixers get off the money, and they can use that towards free agency. Who knows? Maybe even use like a mid-level exception type item on a guy like Jay Crowder or someone.
Yeah, I mean, over half of the Knicks roster from last season was power forwards. 9 of the 17 rostered players were power forwards. So it would only be fitting if they traded for another and Mike Scott.
The Philadelphia 70 Knicks.
Yeah.
And I think New York would probably do this because, I mean, that's how rebuilding teams get value. They take on they take off dead money. And they say, okay, we'll take the contract, but we need second round pick. That's an added asset. I think the Knicks would do that with the if the second round pick was good enough. Like, I don't think they're going to do it for like the Lakers second round pick from the Sixers, but maybe like Atlanta's second round pick. That's my trade. But what's your next one?
Yeah, let me see how you feel about this one, because this is something I think can really benefit Philadelphia. And again, this is a really low risk trade with really high reward upside. So Philadelphia stays out west. They trade with Denver, and they get Will Barton and Monty Morris.
Wow.
For the money, Will Barton, close to 14 mil, 2 years. Monty Morris, only 1.7. So neither are making that much money. And the return for Denver would be Mike Scott. So you get that $5 million MLE off of your cap, Josh Richardson, and Zaire Smith. Now, the problem with these trades is I try to remove the Philadelphia bias when I think about putting myself in the shoes of another general manager. And if you're Denver, I don't know what you look at this trade at and you're really like intrigued by, because it's only Josh, Zaire, and Mike Scott. But at the same time, Monty Morris is going to make money, so you're going to have to open your wallets and pay him. And with a couple of pending free agents, he may not be the priority there in Denver. And Will Barton is a really productive player. He's had a really lucrative career in Denver. But I think Josh Richardson, you kind of hit the nail on the head, as a player that can thrive in a system. And in Miami, he showed flashes of being a really promising shooting guard and a hybrid three. And I think in Philadelphia, with some limited opportunity and more offensive responsibilities in the half court, because you've got a guy in Ben Simmons who doesn't shoot, and maybe Joel Embiid's woes cause Richardson to do some different things. So I think in a system that's already molded, Richardson could be a player that could be really good. And Denver needed that kind of secondary guard in the playoffs. Gary Harris came and gave them a burst, but Josh Richardson is a guy who can consistently defend. He can defend other teams' best guards, and offensively, he can give you 15 every night. And in some of his best games, he could give you 30 plus. So he can space the floor and he can contribute in a system. And I think adding Zaire Smith is also something Denver may want to explore. Denver took a risk with MPJ. It worked out well. And Zaire Smith is a guy who's really young. He was a year younger than Mikal Bridges when the Sixers actually drafted Mikal Bridges. So Zaire has plenty of upside. No team really knows what he looks like. There's very limited film, and he's only had time in the G League. But this is a guy with incredible bounce. He's a good defender, and if it works out, he could be a really good and worthy player to have at the two position for a team.
Yeah. So I don't think Denver would do that trade. Mm-hmm. I think they would laugh at the Sixers. Because like Will Barton's sort of the heart and soul of that like second unit now. Even though he was starting the majority of the year, I think they view him, Michael Porter, as untouchable, and so they'll probably like step in the starting role. But I mean, I think Monte Morris is top 2 or 3 backup point guard in the NBA.
Yeah,
I think he's going to get a lot of money when he's a free agent, like probably around 10, maybe a little more per year. Mm-hmm. So I mean, those are 2 of Denver's better players. I don't see a world where you're getting, like a really good shot creator and Will Barton, along with a really good backup point guard for Josh, Zaire, Mike Scott, unless you're giving up like a first round pick too.
Yeah, you'd have to attach a pick there.
Which I'm not. I mean, I like both those players, but I don't think it would make a lot of sense for the Sixers to give up another first round pick.
That's the thing. You got at some point you got to draft in the first round and commit player. At some point it has to happen. Yeah.
I think the Sixers would be elated by that trade. I don't think the Nuggets would even come close to being satisfied by it. For me, the Sixers get Lonzo from New Orleans.
Okay.
And the roster begins to kind of make sense. People think like Lonzo just simply can't shoot because of the mechanics. Mm-hmm. He shot like 38% from three this past season on a volume of like 8 attempts per game.
Yeah.
So he would have been the Sixers by far their best shooter this year.
Mm-hmm.
And so I tend to think that. So you get Lonzo, it kind of makes sense with your roster now because you have a guy who can shoot the ball, has really good full court vision, is an underrated perimeter defender, I think.
Very underrated.
Yeah. And so I think so they get Lonzo, Pelicans get Josh.
Okay.
They get Zaire.
Okay.
And they get a 2020 second round pick. And
beautiful.
Yeah. So the Sixers, I think, would jump all over that. So from the people I've talked to about Zaire, everyone thinks he's gone. Like people are like, yeah, it's a shame. Hopefully the next game will be a good fit. And I'm like, whoa. You're related to the guy. What are you talking about? And they're like, yeah, well, I'm like, whoa, this is wild. So Zaire, I think even though people are like, why would anyone want Zaire? He's like done nothing. That's
Mhm.
why there's some value to him, because he hasn't done anything. There's nothing to go off of to say that he's a negative asset. He's caught, as far as any team knows, he's cost controlled. He'll happily put the pen to paper on whatever contract you give him next. If you want to give him an extended tryout, and if he pans out, that's basically a really cost effective,
Yeah.
perimeter player slash, guard or forward, whatever. I think New Orleans wouldn't do this unless you attached like another pick. So maybe 2 second-round picks,
Yeah.
maybe Josh, Zaire, and a first, and then maybe the Pelicans throw on like Josh Hart or another asset that's like inexpensive to make the money work. But I think Lonzo Ball is a much better player than that package would return.
Yeah. And I love Lonzo Ball. Lonzo, like you said, is a really underrated perimeter defender. Offensively, I think he has arguably the best full court vision in the league among the youth. So if you talk about guys that are under 26 years old, not many are better passers than Lonzo Ball. And the Sixers have one of the guys that is in Ben Simmons. So if you compare the two of them together, the transition buckets will be crazy. The buckets in the half court will be crazy because they'd be finding Joe in the right spots. And if Lonzo can space the floor, then it definitely works. So I'm with you there. If New Orleans is willing to flip either Drew or Lonzo, I think Philadelphia has a pretty plausible chance of getting them because they can formulate some package for one of them. Now, before I get into the Buddy Hield and Chris Paul nonsense, because I know we're going to hash some things out with the two of them, I wanted to see what you would think if you were in Dallas' shoes and the Sixers call you with this trade, right?
Okay.
They ask for Tim Hardaway Jr. and DeLon Wright.
I loved Tim Hardaway Jr. I loved Tim Hardaway Jr.
Like we can sit on this podcast all night and talk about underrated wings because there's plenty of them in the NBA.
And he's one of them.
Tim Hardaway is most definitely one of them, and his father was a great ball player, so it's only right that Tim's a great ball player. He's the type of guy that goes under the radar, but offensively, he's a juggernaut. He's a dangerous player because he can light it up from beyond the arc, and he can score in a multitude of ways. So Philadelphia booty calls you. They're asking for Tim Hardaway and DeLon Wright.
Wait. Philadelphia booty calls you? Did you just say?
Elton Brand
Wow.
staying up late. He calls Mark Cuban. He's hitting them with this trade, right?
That's the hotline bling.
Yeah, it's exactly right. He says, I'm going to trade to you Al Horford, Mike Scott, and Josh Richardson. You're going to trade us Tim Hardaway and DeLon Wright. Maybe throw in a Dorian Finney-Smith to make the cap work. Maybe put some picks in there. But that as a general centerpiece, Hardaway and DeLon Wright. What do you think?
What are the Sixers giving back?
They giving away or getting back?
What are they getting back? Or no. What are they giving away?
Al Horford, Mike Scott, and Joshua Richardson.
There's no way. I don't think they do it.
Here's the thing. We think we're outsmarting everybody because we know these underrated wings. The guys that are in control of the money in the organization, they know who these players are too. So I'm trying to be slick here on behalf of Philadelphia's front office, but I know most of these wouldn't work.
Well, so my thing is this. Why would Dallas want Al Horford?
Well, I just think the inconsistency they've had at the center position could maybe benefit them. And in Dallas's offense, which runs from the top of the key, if Luka's not isolating, somebody's got to be there to set screens, right? So you've had injury with Dwight Powell, you've had injury with Kristaps Porzingis. Maxi Kleber can play that five, but teams can run them off. So maybe a guy like Al Horford who can give you the pick and pop, or who'd be committed to setting screens or maybe popping at the mid-range could help a team like Dallas. But at the same time, I don't know how trading away a player like Tim Hardaway would help Dallas any more than getting Al Horford would.
Okay. So let me ask you this. Why would Dallas accept that trade and not like Tim Hardaway, DeLon Wright, Dorian Finney-Smith for Oladipo?
Well, if Indiana proposes that, hell yeah, you accept that. Absolutely.
Yeah. I like the trade for the Sixers. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're asking for a lot of return on Al Horford, especially. and you're also asking them to take on Mike Scott, it's basically actively get worse.
Yep.
And then I guess Josh is kind of something that Josh can kind of fit there.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, you're asking for like basically two starters in return.
Yep.
So I think that's a tough ask. I think Mark Cuban asks, "Are you calling me from your cell phone?" It's only because you need my love.
Yeah. We're gonna chalk that one up. What's the next trade? I'm gonna act like I didn't hear that. I'm turning this on, man.
Quick word from our sponsors. Do you like shotgunning beer? Do you want to increase your shotgunning time at parties? Check out my boys at the King Cobra. King Cobra is a shotgunning tool that makes the perfect shotgunning hole in under a second. Also a tab puller, vent puncher, and all fits on the keychain. For more information about the King Cobra, check them out on Instagram at the King Cobra Co. That's the King Cobra Co. And Cobra is spelled with a K. For a 10% discount on all Cobra products, enter the code JustTheCobra10, all caps, all one word. Pick up yours today. Brock, I think you are hinging that trade on Mark Cuban using a King Cobra.
Well, listen, some wine might be involved if Elton Red's making that booty call. He's up late at night. He might have some wine in him. But look, I've got Greeny Green in the comments section coming.
Listen. Me and Mark Cuban are going to be on this barefoot action right here. Yes.
How you're feeling? That's
shout out barefoot. Greeny Green says I think they might do that trade. Dallas doesn't value Delon Wright much, and I could see Cuban liking a veteran center like Horford. So are you? I guess it could work in a sense, but no, it wouldn't work, and here's why. Because they want to bring in, they have their eyes on Giannis, and if you bring in Horford, you're not getting Giannis.
This is also true. But, yeah. I mean, Tim Hardaway and Delon Wright are making a combined $28 million or more than that between the two. So, but at the same time, Richardson's making 10. Okay, I understand that.
Yeah.
I mean, you trade away. Okay, I understand that.
Yeah. So, like Dallas is already paying Porzingis 5 years, whatever, 100, basically a max. Yeah. They're gonna obviously have to max out Luka. And they want to go after Greek Freak or Giannis Antetokounmpo. I don't know why, but all the names were in my head. Must have been too much barefoot. But I mean, I don't see where they're taking on Horford unless and maybe that door opens if Giannis is like, listen, I'm going to Miami or I'm staying in Milwaukee, and like, all right, let's move on then. He also said, Greeny Green also says, I also think they might like Jay Rich better than Hardaway.
That's what I think.
They might, and I think maybe you could sell that Josh didn't like his role in Philly or whatever, but I think he definitely kind of lowered his trade value this year. And it wasn't like he just had decline on one side of the court. He was basically bad on both ends of the court.
Yeah.
Which is more than I think you can just chalk up to it was a bad system, because then you have to say, well, it was a bad system on both ends, which it was. But Ben Simmons didn't have a catastrophic decline in his defense.
And I mean, Josh is an experienced PNR player. While he's not a great PNR ball handler, that was a huge part of his game in Miami. And Miami was where there was a system in place. And Miami was where he played his best basketball. So he comes to Philly, he gets hurt early. I think it was his hamstring in November. He gets hurt early. Brett Brown's the head coach, maybe doesn't utilize him the right way. Can't run that pick and roll as often, and he's kind of propelled into a role that entails way more than he should actually be doing. So I think you could sell Jay Rich as more of an asset than maybe we're giving him credit for. And I do think Al Horford, if he would be a serviceable center on any team, it would be in Dallas. But it just depends what they want to do with Wright and Hardaway, because Wright's a guy who's going to play 20, 25 minutes a game for him. But at the same time, if you have such a ball-dominant player in Luka Doncic, then what exactly is Wright's role on a nightly basis?
Yeah, for sure. I think you have a lot better chance of underselling or maybe of pitching Josh's value well compared to Horford.
Without
I
a doubt.
think they have a lot of stress and they have a lot of pressure to get rid of Horford because
Mhm.
if you don't get him off this season, and then he has a second consecutive season where he's like this, then it's not just that it was a bad fit, but it's like no, he's 34 declining and we owe him 85 million. We're not taking him on.
Yep.
No, it's not happening.
Yep.
So I think it's going to be a scenario where you have to package them together in order to like get off plus
or
picks.
at least the first round pick. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure. DeMarcus Lewis says, I know there's little to no chance to get JJ Redick back. I think there's no chance of that. I think bringing in Stan Van Gundy was like an ultimate sign that like JJ will be there. But do you guys think there's any chance to get Rocco back? It's interesting. I think it's a better chance now that Morey's out of the picture because that was basically a Morey that had Morey stamp all over it. And I think if they decide to go with a rebuild kind of thing, they might look to purge some of their current value to get assets back, like picks, because they've been kind of reckless with picks recently. And I mean, then I guess there's a possibility, but I tend to think as long as you have Harden on the roster, you're trying to win, and I think Rocco helps them win. So I don't know. I mean, I think that's a pretty low chance, but I think there's a better chance than JJ happening. So I mean, that kind of answers your question with like the context that you provided. Sure. TDSFHH asks, is Lonzo for Jay Rich happening? I guess you picked up on my smile. There's been some buzz. I don't know that it's going to happen, but I think there's some buzz to it. But we shall see in time. I think.
Is Lonzo's agency clutch now? Did
yes.
he declare clutch? Okay,
yep. But it isn't just that. There actually has been some like, hey, what do you think about this?
Yeah, off the record, probably.
Yeah. And so I mean, I think it's sort of those are just sort of like little signs that fans look at and they kind of brush over, or they jokingly they think about. But I think there's actually a little bit of smoke to that. For me, another one for Josh is if the viewers haven't realized, we're working hard to get rid of Josh Richardson from the Sixers. Well, I mean, even though he had really good stretches with the Sixers, I think you have to trade him. The Sixers return Josh Richardson to Miami, and they get a backup center. So Sixers receive Kelly Olynyk, and the Heat receive Josh Richardson. And my rationale is, I do believe every player with the player option, unless they like had a breakout season and criminally overperformed that player option, I think every player is going to opt in because the market is just so uncertain and teams are not going to want to spend a ton of money. So like when you hear that rumor that Andre Drummond might opt out of his 28 million option, I like laughed at myself because I was like, there's no way you're opting at 28 million. You're never going to see that money ever again. But I think Kelly will opt in because he was basically played off the court for large stretches this season. And if that's the case, I think the Heat might try to get off his contract and maybe re-sign Myers Leonard, or maybe like another inexpensive backup center, or someone that is really cost effective, is cheap. So I think Miami would do that trade.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're Miami, I think you do that. And the thing with Kelly Olynyk is that he shot over 37% from three in multiple seasons. So Kelly Olynyk is a guy off the bench that can definitely space the floor for Philadelphia, but defensively, he's not the backup center you want. I think you're underselling Richardson here a little bit. And the problem is there's this stigma that when players come to Philadelphia, they ironically forget how to shoot. It's like the thing you're seeing now with other players in the NFL thriving on other teams, Sidney Jones, Nelson Aguilar, not on the Eagles. So if this is true, that players come to Philadelphia and forget how to shoot, which I think it's going to change now that there's the new head coach and everything. But if this is true and you traded Josh Richardson, now we're stuck with Kelly Olynyk, one of the goofiest looking players in the NBA, for 72 games, and you get him shooting 33% from beyond the arc, and then you wish you never made that trade. So This is something where if you're Miami, I think you do it. You get Richardson back under Spoelstra and in that system where he did well in before. But I think we're underselling Richardson a little bit here and just getting Kelly Olynyk in return.
Well, so here's my thing with like the backup center idea.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need your backup center to play 25 minutes per game. You need him to play. You need him to play an off night when Joel can't play, and even then, you're probably going to go like 5 out and let Ben just run down the middle of the floor. Mm-hmm. But you're paying a backup center to play 13 good minutes per night, really, because you're hoping to play Embiid 32, 35 minutes. So let's say 13 to 16 good minutes every night. I think a lot of guys can do that, and so I do tend to think that Olynyk makes a lot of sense there. And in terms of like aren't we selling Josh's value a little bit there? Yeah, just like when the Sixers traded Jimmy Butler for Josh Richardson.
Yeah, obviously. Well,
they owe us a favor. They owe the Sixers a favor back.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. The thing is, I mean, Olynyk historically in Miami has played about 20 minutes a game off the bench. That's probably not what he's going to get on a nightly basis if he's on a team like Philadelphia. But the thing is, Joel Embiid, given his history with injuries, is, I guess, cautiously an injury-prone player. Whether that's his decision or management not letting him play, I can't imagine that the Sixers would feel confident rolling out Kelly Olynyk at their starting 5 on Joel Embiid's nights off or in the stretches of months when Joel Embiid can't play. You're digging yourself a hole there. So I think the Sixers need to allocate some money into a backup center position, and that's definitely what cost them in the playoffs for a couple of series. But I didn't imagine they'd give Al Horford $28 million over the course of 4 years. So I think if you can get a different backup center, you can most definitely do that in free agency, and you probably won't have to trade Josh Richardson for him.
Yeah, no, I agree. TDSFHH says, my trade idea is Horford for Aldridge and then trade LMA for Rozier or Fournier. So I think number one is that trade is underselling Aldridge.
Mm-hmm.
And I think number two, it's sort of like, why wouldn't the Spurs just then trade Aldridge directly for Rozier? That's sort of like my thinking with that. And I think Rozier would be a good fit with the Sixers.
I don't think Charlotte trades him yet.
Not neither do I.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just me. He also says Spurs love old centers. Horford fits really well with Pop, and there are rumors of MLMA leaving. I actually think that DeMar DeRozan is headed out too, and I think maybe that trade looks like something with Sacramento, maybe something with Detroit. I think those are all possibilities, but we shall see. What do you guys think about the idea of signing Marc Gasol with the MLE and maybe trading back for Boban to help with load management for Embiid?
Not a bad idea. The latter half. I like Boban, man. I thought Boban was dominant, man. He's OP. Boban can't be stopped. He's got.
Listen. Who didn't love Boban? But his inability to stay on the court in a playoff game was part of what inspired the Sixers to go and sign Al Horford.
Like possession.
Yeah, and I think Marc Gasol is going back to Spain, unless that's changed. But I think he's going back to Spain. If he isn't, I would jump at that opportunity if I'm the Sixers. I mean, for sure, he might want to start, but
no. And here's why you don't, because the last time we all got fooled into getting Joel Embiid.
That's true. That's true. The last time we got an Embiid stopper, he forgot how to stop anybody else.
Yeah, exactly.
Top Dog Izzy says trade Embiid for Josh Hart. Don't think that under the current regime, probably not. Under the previous regime, that bet wouldn't be off the table. Aldridge is 35 and Horford seems like a Spurs guy. Yeah, but a lot of people seem like Spurs guys.
Anybody that doesn't do anything flashy, that doesn't
Yeah,
dribble with the ball in front of them, doing crossover moves, take step backs, belongs in the Spurs.
yeah. Like the Spurs never wanted Kevin Durant because he was too flashy. um, I think Aldridge might make sense going back to Portland.
I
Look,
like that. I like that a lot, actually. I didn't even think about that.
yeah,
What's the control for Nurkic? Do you know off the top of your head?
I don't know. No, I don't know. But I think that's a trade that would make sense for both sides. Top Dog Izzy also says re-sign Allen Iverson. Okay, we think we get it. What he's trying to do.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the trades. Can you? So I gave you my Olenek for Richardson.
Mm-hmm.
What? Give me your next one.
Yeah, so this is the final trade before we discuss Buddy Hield and Chris Paul.
Okay.
So I'm trading Al Horford, a 2021 first round pick, the 2020 second round, and 2020 second round. So 3 picks, one of which is a first, and Al Horford go to the Los Angeles Clippers in return for Lou Williams.
Williams. I knew it was coming.
And this makes sense to me, right? Because you've got a team in the Clippers who obviously have some trades to make or free agent signings to make in this offseason, or lack thereof, however long or short it's going to be. Something has to happen in that window to appease Kawhi Leonard and PG. I don't believe many of the rumors about Kawhi and PG potentially splitting up yet, but I do know that Los Angeles doesn't have much of a future in terms of assets. They've basically sold their soul for Kawhi and PG, so they have very limited picks and youth. So I think if they could get 3 picks here, a first round specifically, and even Al Horford to just kind of fill some cap and maybe get veteran leadership, maybe a chemistry building guy, somebody to mold the starting 5 or maybe come off of the bench in the power forward or 5 position for just Lou Williams could be beneficial for both teams. If you're Philadelphia, I think you love this trade. Sweet Lou is arguably the best man off the bench to ever do it, and he's one of the best shot creators in the game. Lou Williams' game will never go old. He's like Jamal Crawford. So if you're Philadelphia, I think you jump this. If you're the Clippers, it makes sense. You can get Lou Williams and Tobias under Doc again. So I think Philadelphia will be enamored to make this trade.
So let me ask you this then. Is Horford plus 3 picks worth the fact that Lou Will has now carved a reputation for being an underperformer in the playoffs? I mean, it's been multiple seasons in a row where he's just been horrible in the playoffs.
Well,
and he doesn't guard anybody.
Of course not. Defensively, it's tough to have him, but at the same time, if you look at the flexibility or Philadelphia has multi-positional defensive flexibility. If the other team's best player is a 1 or a 2, Lou Williams isn't going to defend them, and if it's a 3 through a 5, Lou Williams isn't going to defend them. So I don't think he is too much of a burden defensively at the end of games. And in terms of shot creation, I think people are a little disrespectful of Lou Williams. I mean, this is one of the best shot creators in the league.
Sure.
He can get a shot off from anywhere on the floor, and he can break down any defensive opponent. I remember 2 years ago when Golden State and Los Angeles played in the playoffs and there was a couple of injuries, Lou Williams stepped up and he single-handedly dogged Golden State. And this was when he's 33 years old. This is what he's been doing throughout his career. So defensively, he had a little bit of a resurgence in LA under Doc Rivers. He was getting more steals and a league leader in that category. And offensively, Lou's one of the best to ever do it. So here's what I'm thinking. A first-round pick for a 34-year-old guy doesn't make much more sense. And then you attach 2 more picks. But here's where it makes sense. Lou Williams is due for $8 million with 1 year remaining on his contract. Al Horford is due for $28 million with 3 more years left on that contract. So if you can convince a team to take that contract and get it off of your books and you have to throw in a first-round pick, I would do it. But the problem is not many teams are going to give up valuable players for Al Horford on that package. Lou Williams is a guy who still has value, and he can help the Sixers immediately. So I would do it personally if I'm Philadelphia.
So here's where I think the Sixers would absolutely jump at that. But I think the Sixers have to also consider that the other team would not jump for that. And here's why. Mm-hmm. So number one, basically by taking on Horford, you're saying, and the 3 picks, you're saying this.
Mm-hmm.
So basically the implication is that Horford makes more sense than Montrezl Harrell would, because I think Montrezl Harrell, I think Montrezl Harrell they're gonna let him walk. I think, and and he's gonna get, I guess 12 to 15, 10 to 15 mil. So that's a significantly cheaper price for a guy who's younger and a better player at this point. So I also don't think that makes sense. And even if you can find an argument against that, you could also say, well, how about the guy that Doc Rivers basically didn't go to in the playoffs and instead went to Harrell, and that would be Ivica Zubac, who fits perfectly in the role. He's a solid screener, cheap. Why wouldn't they stick with that? Because their ultimate goal at the end of the day is to just build a better team around Kawhi and Paul George and convince both of them to re-sign. Mm-hmm. And I think with Horford, you have to then sacrifice depth, and I think it's a harder sell on them.
Okay.
I think that they would like picks, but I also think that they mortgage their entire future for a reason. That was because they're trying to win now.
And I think they only have 2 more years, if I'm not mistaken, 2 more years of control with Kawhi and PG together. So that window went from 3 to 5 years to now just 2, if it even is 2 more years of control. From my perspective, I thought if LA could maybe salvage their future and get a couple of picks and eat the Al Horford contract, they would do it. I mean, you just blew a 3-1 lead in the playoffs. You fire your coach, you hire a new one who was already on the staff, and there's already been rumblings about how bad their chemistry was this season. So I think there needs to be a drastic change in that locker room for them. And I don't know which that player is going to be, whether it is Harrell that departs or they trade Lou Williams, but the Clippers are most definitely going to be active. It's just a matter of what they try to do around Kawhi and PG in these next 2 years.
If you're the Clippers and the Sixers offer Ben Simmons, Josh, and like a 2nd-round pick, 2 second-round picks for Lou Will and Paul George, did the Clippers do it?
I think, of course. I as Philadelphia should never do that. But if you're the Clippers, I think you do that. Like I said, you only have about 1 year or 2 left of control of PG and Kawhi. Ben Simmons is still under contract if you were to trade for him today for 4 more seasons. And then you'd probably have to max him again. But if Kawhi leaves, there you go. You have your superstar right in LA and you don't have to do anything. So I think definitely they would do that trade.
I don't think they would do that trade. And here's why.
Really?
I think if you do that trade, you're also risking pushing Kawhi out the door. Because think about it, he said he would sign there if they got Paul George, and then you go and trade Paul George for Ben Simmons.
I did say like 5 or 10 minutes ago. I did say 5 or 10 minutes ago. I don't believe the Kawhi and PG soap opera, but at the same time, listen, man, Kawhi might be looking at PG like, dog, you got to step up. You got to help me out here, man. You got to. Well,
yeah, but by the same token, Kawhi shot 6 of 22 in a Game 7.
He did.
So the blame goes around. Yeah. And if he makes they got blown out, but it wasn't just that it was like all like Paul George's fault. It wasn't like Thunderstruck, the Kevin Durant movie. It was like they all just collectively shit the bed. But
now let me ask you this. This is unrelated, but we're watching the 1983 NBA Finals, the Sixers and the Lakers, the series the Sixers sweep the Lakers.
Wait.
My roommates and I, we're watching it on TV. And one of my roommates, he didn't really consume anything basketball related before 2016. So he is a pretty narrow-minded.
Hold on, I'm going to pour some more wine for this one.
Go ahead. You're going to need it. But he knows about old basketball. So it's not like he doesn't know what he's talking about, but we're watching the game. And mind you, there's like, of both starting fives, probably 4 of the 5 are in the Hall of Fame.
Okay.
And he tried telling me that Paul George would step onto that floor and dominate. The 1983 NBA Finals. Moses Malone, Julius Erving, Mo Cheeks, Bobby Jones. Look at the Lakers squad too. I looked at him. I'm like, you can't be serious. And I thought it was funny because I had a holiday ruined. I don't want to say ruined, but it didn't feel like a holiday because the whole time my dad, me, and my uncle were arguing about James Harden and old school basketball. And I was of the belief that if James Harden stepped onto the court in 1980s, nobody could guard him. They wouldn't know how to guard him just because of how creative he is and how agile and everything he does. But now that I've had a few months to reflect on that and I kind of saw the perspectives, my uncle, my dad's perspectives, I'm like, okay, it's a different game. But you'd have to, if you're going to say a player from 2020 would dominate in 1983, what makes you think that the player from 1983, given everything in 2020,
this
the way
is
they
a
played
wild
exactly. I'm like, if Paul George steps in the court in a 1983 game, I don't know what's going to happen, but I know he's not going to dominate the game the way my roommate
See,
would. Like,
I can't have those conversations because I don't know, and I think there's a lot of assumptions to be made there. My guess is what would happen would be this: he steps on the court, and his like do it all kind of charade that is now like common in the NBA would take all of these guys by surprise, and they wouldn't really know what to do. That's my guess.
That's what I said too, but then that's just being really disrespectful to the Magic Johnsons and the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
No. And I agree. But I mean, how many guys were 6'8" with a tight handle and the ability to hit step back threes back in 1983?
True, but here's also my thing, right? If we're going to say that, then we have to say this. If you look at round one and you look at round two for the Clippers, who did the Clippers lose to? Or beat rather? They beat the Mavericks and Denver, right?
Yeah.
There was a couple of times where Paul George had flukes in the playoffs, scored less than 10 points, turned the ball over a couple of times, just had a game to forget. Now, if there's no notable defenders that you could name that should be stopping Paul George on either one of those teams, and there really shouldn't be. If Paul George is a top 12 player, top 15 player, I can't name anybody on Denver right now that could guard that should be guarding Paul George, and I can't name anybody on Dallas that should be guarding Paul George or has the capability to. So if he's getting held to less than 10 points and having horrible games against these guys in 2020, why do we assume that he'd be able to do anything different against the Hall of Fame in Magic Johnson or a Michael Cooper or Julius Erving? That's what I was thinking now. Like, why is Paul George going to step out and dominate? Like, what has given anybody any indication that playoff P would step out on a 1983 Finals game and dominate?
I feel like you were doing some lewd activities that led up to this conversation.
We weren't. We just watched basketball.
Yeah, okay.
Ideas now, bounce ideas off of each
other. You were in the bubble with the guys where there was a no weed policy. It sounds.
No, man.
Or where the weed policy was less stringent.
Tarnishing my name publicly right now. I'm coming up with brilliant ideas. We're having powerful barbershop conversations, and you're being abusive to my name.
My guess is that
Paul George would get one hand check and cry, and he's telling the truth. I watched this game. It's crazy. I understand there wasn't an emphasis on three-point shooting, but it's crazy that, like, where was there to go? Everybody was in the paint. Like, even if you're worried about driving and being met by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar at the rim, Moses Malone's right next to him. So you got two bodies in the paint. You're not being defended by 5 players. There's 9 players in the paint. You're getting your ass beat.
My guess would be he would dominate the first game he played, and then they'd probably have him figured out by game 3 or 4.
Okay, that's a good meet in the middle. That's what our world needs more of. We need to meet in the middle more often. I'm okay.
All right. Now here's my last trade because we are running against the clock now. Yeah. Sixers get their buddy Hield.
Okay.
And everyone is like weird. It's clearly he's a very polarizing player because one half of the spectrum is like he's not that good, yada yada yada. Other half is like we got to get Buddy Hield. I'm kind of somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
I think he's the perfect fit.
Mhm.
and I think you can sacrifice whatever his shortcomings are because he's such a damn good shooter.
Mhm.
But my trade was Corey Joseph,
Corey Joe.
Buddy Hield
Okay.
for Al,
Okay.
Josh, their pick of Shake and Matisse,
Okay.
and a 2020 second round pick via the Atlanta Hawks.
So the Sixers give up Al Horford, Josh Richardson, Shake, and Matisse.
One of them,
One.
their choice.
Okay.
Yeah,
And in
and
return, Corey
and
Joe and Buddy Hield.
and a second round pick from the Hawks, so a high second round pick for Corey Joe and Buddy Hield. I think the Kings would do that.
I mean, I'm looking around the league. I'm like, why should anybody trade for Al Horford? And everybody loves to assume that Sacramento wants to because of the rumors that they were interested in signing Al as a free agent. So if
And
this
there
is,
were some other rumors that, I mean, you know,
you might be drinking a little too much of that wine over
I tend to think that the Kings would do that, and
Yeah.
I think the Sixers would do that too, and I think the Sixers would be probably giving a slight overpay.
A slight overpay. See, like I look at Sacramento's roster, and there really isn't a center or power forward on this roster that you'd want to roll out. And on the other hand, it's like, are you sure you want to roll out Al Horford as your starting center or power forward? But I think if you look at all NBA teams that are in a position right now to take this contract on and be willing to take Al Horford's style of play at what, 33, 34 years old, Sacramento is the team that would be probably most inclined to do it. But I think if we're going to ask about all of these other trades, why would a team do it? This is my question to people proposing trades to Sacramento. What incentive is there for Sacramento to trade Buddy Hield to Philadelphia for Al Horford? But Austin, I think you kind of answer that question in including Shake Milton or Matisse Thybulle. I think that's where people are really getting lost in transition.
How's a pick?
Plus a pick. Despite the chemistry problems that Sacramento's had with Buddy Hield and his coaches and even the front office, and last season, what went on with him sitting in the fourth and being outspoken about it, I think Sacramento is willing to move Buddy Hield, and Buddy Hield probably doesn't want to be in Sacramento. But I don't think Al Horford is the sell there. I think it's Shake Milton and Matisse Thybulle. This way, Sacramento gets something to build with, a little bit of youth. And the contract, they get a center or forward that they can play and maybe take Bagley under his wing and Al Horford, or I don't know. Al Horford seems like a seamless fit with a team like Sacramento. So I think we answered that there with Thybulle and Milton being included.
So here's what I think. I think it makes sense because I think it allows Sacramento to play at a slower pace, and that kind of allows them to unpack the De'Aaron Fox pick and roll game. And I also think that they would like to re-sign Bogdanovich.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make sense to extend him when you already have Hield, but if you get a piece that fits better like Al Horford, at least it makes more sense to extend him, even if you're up against the cap or whatever. And then I also would say you're getting back Shake and Matisse, so that's like a foundational role player you can build upon, plus a very high second round pick, which I think in this year's draft is a pretty nice asset. So I think there's a lot of reason for both sides to get that trade done. Sue Belmo says trade for CP3 for Tobias, J. Rich, 2020 second round pick, and Shake Milton. I think people got to stop with the Tobias Harris trades because I'm one of the biggest Tobias Harris advocates out there. His contract has absolutely zero value in the market. No one wants that contract. The only way you're getting off that contract is if he's averaging like 26, 27 points per game. And even then, maybe he's lifted the team up so much that you don't even want to trade him at that point. So, I mean, I think he's here to stay. I think he's going to be a Sixer for the duration of his contract, whether it be for the better or for the worse. Worse. And then he says, avoid trading Matisse with our class. We got to get away from the avoid trading Matisse thing. Matisse Thybulle is not that good. Like, his ceiling is not that far above what he is right now. You're hoping he's like a 36% catch and shoot 3-point shooter. He's never going to be a shot creator. He can't dribble the basketball. Like, he can't dribble the ball. He can kind of finish at the rim. He's the allure is obviously he's a great wing defender, but a lot of guys can be good wing defenders, and all you need to be a good wing defender, really, or have the potential to be a good wing defender, is to have the motor and the size to do so. And a lot of guys have that now. Mm-hmm. So, Cheers Mate 55 says surely Josh is greater value than Corey Joseph.
I think so.
I think so, but I also think that you give up losing that part of the trade. You give up losing that part of the trade for the sake of you get back basically two guys that fit three needs. Like, you get a backup point guard, and you get Buddy Hield, who's your sniper plus another scorer. So I mean, I think you lose that part of the trade willingly if it means you get back Hield and you get a Horford contract. Are you mad and says Tease ain't that good? I'm out. Okay, but he isn't that good.
Wow, we're doubling down.
Brock, you can't tell me that Matisse Thybulle is that good of a player. I get everyone loves him, but like, ask yourself, is he was a net negative on the basketball court on the offensive side. He was a very undisciplined on-ball defender, often fell behind his guy in the pick and roll and then rode him on the hip and then got called for fouls. He couldn't even really play extended minutes in games because he got called for fouls. Matisse Thybulle isn't that good of a player. And I don't think I think he's a fine, serviceable rotation. I think he's a very good rotational defender, but I just don't see the ceiling for him as a player being that high above what he is now. And you can't given that you can't let what you like about him hold you back from acquiring a guy like Hield and simultaneously getting off of a bad contract. You just can't.
I get the allure, and his personality is perfect for Philadelphia, which is why he blended so well with the fan base. And you know I'm a defensive appreciator, so I love the allure of Matisse Thybulle as a basketball player. The problem is the offensive ceiling. The question is, what can he become offensively? At best, you can maybe assume he'll develop into a Robert Covington offensive contributor where, yeah, he has the catch and shoot. He can move off ball. You can use him as a screener and a roller, and he can handle the ball occasionally. But in what we saw in his first season offensively, he has a lot of work to do. It's more of a project than you may anticipate, which is okay. I like his age. He came out of college with experience, so he's probably going to develop faster than most guys out of the draft will. But it's just, what is that offensive ceiling like? So defensively, yeah, you'd love to keep him. Him and Ben Simmons would be a nightmare for opposing teams. But if the return is something offensively really good, it'd be hard to give him up. I mean, it'd be hard not to give him up.
Yeah. What about argument to keep out, let him restore trade value? Here's the thing, though. I think it's a big gamble because if you don't trade him and he has a second consecutive season under a new head coach where it's like it just doesn't make any sense and he actively holds you back, you can't just hide behind the idea that it was Brett Brown's fault or the system wasn't good or whatever.
Sure, you got to watch that.
It's now that, okay, he's an older player who's actively getting old and it's making him a worse player, and we have to take on 40+ mil to on against our cap. No thanks. So I think even if there's a chance of that, you still have to get off of that contract because the risk is too high. Nadir Aga says, I don't think Philadelphia deserves him, meaning Furkan Korkmaz. Okay, it's an interesting thought.
Who does? Who deserves him?
Yeah.
I don't know anybody that's going to commit to Furkan Korkmaz more than Brett Brown.
I think the
God damn.
I think the NBA deserves him. By the NBA, meaning the Norwegian Basketball Association deserves him.
Come on, there's worse players than Furkan Korkmaz in the NBA. There's worse players in the NBA. But yeah. They gave him a contract. He said he didn't want to be in Philadelphia. He didn't like the playing time. So what did Brett Brown do? They said, "The hell with every other free agent. We're going to give this guy a 3-year contract, and I'm going to make him shoot the hell out of the basketball and grow him into a bomber." So I don't think anybody would have taken and pampered Furkan Korkmaz as much as Philadelphia did.
Let me ask you this: was that Korkmaz being the best shooter and a breakout player on a team that was a 4-0 sweep and a 6 seed, or was that him like breaking out for a team that is a legitimate playoff team? Like I think if you have better pieces, you're not capped out next season, and he's still on the roster, I think he's in street clothes a lot of the nights.
Well, it could have been this too. How many threes a game does Ben Simmons shoot?
It's true.
Okay.
It's true.
Al Horford is your best catch and shoot option on the floor.
Not many
times with this 76ers lineups, right? Al Horford, Josh Richardson, Matisse Thybulle. These are your catch and shooters, right? So if Furkan Korkmaz is the only guy that's going to catch and shoot and be used to come around screens and run DHOs and stuff of that sort, of course he's going to look like a good shooter. But the problem is that's pretty much all his game is predicated upon. Defensively, he did a better job this year handling his responsibility, staying in front of guys. But if he's not hitting his 3-ball, he's virtually unplayable. I think he's a very replaceable player, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I also think that part of it was how can we mimic or replicate the JJ Redick feel that Joel had, because Joel was obviously not in a good place this past year. And I think that was like, okay, let's try Korkmaz, and so they tried to do that. Nadir Aga says again, this is the last one before we actually have to go. He is 33rd in the 3-point percentage in the league. So that's great. It's good for.
And you know where it got you? Watching round 2 from your own home couches.
Did you know that Jason Capono won 3-point contests for the Miami Heat, and then he was out of the NBA 2 years later? like that's great. You have to be able to do more than that. That's a good selling point. 7 or 8 years, 33rd in the NBA isn't even that is like it's good, but it's like how are you gonna bring that to like a meeting and be like, you know what? I was 33rd in the NBA in 3-point percentage. I want my money. Like, no, what?
Furkan got his money, man. He got his money and ran off on the plug twice. So Philadelphia, they're gonna have to live with that one.
Yeah, Brock, what do you got going on?
The DeMarcus Cousins video is coming. These fans are arrogant. Furkan might deserve better, but the DeMarcus video is coming out this weekend. Austin, you might not like that one. I know you're.
Did you say I tagged you in that tweet?
I did. I didn't want to give any attention though. If you guys listen and don't know, there was a Twitter trend going around. Your first name hypothetically is the player that you hated most 10 years ago.
10 years ago.
Your last name is hypothetically the player you hate most now. So George Karl, former coach of DeMarcus Cousins and of Sacramento, right on cue, quote tweets it, DeMarcus Cousins with a snake emoji. I have no words for you and George Karl, Austin. I have no words for you too.
Who was the coach before George Karl?
Oh man, I don't know. I know who their assistant was when he was drafted.
Is it Michael Malone?
Mike Malone was a coach of DeMarcus's, and they had a pretty good relationship, but I don't know if he came before or after George Karl.
I just think it's interesting that all of these like older white boomers.
Yeah, I wonder what the common theme here is.
Yeah, these older white boomers are the ones that don't like DeMarcus Cousins. I think it's an interesting theme. Last thing before we go, Cheers Minute 55 says, do we keep our second round picks and commit to getting a couple of bench pieces under new free front office targets? I think they're going to sell off or like trade at least one of their second round picks. But I think this is a year where they begin to value those assets because you just you desperately need cost effective depth on the roster, and they don't have any of that. and targets. There's so many. Like Brock, you know how much I've been doing with the mock drafts, and like the draft this season, and I finally solidified my top 5. But I'm looking up and down like our evaluations from the painted lines, and I keep thinking to myself, there are so many 3-and-D wings and guys that can like are good off movement, are athletic enough to and big enough to defend multiple positions, can kind of put it on the floor a little bit and shoot off the dribble. I think there are so many options that it's hard to narrow down one. I think that they really like Tyrell Terry and Desmond Bane. Those would be the 2 that I think are kind of high up on their big board. A couple more names that I like Aaron Nesmith, Neesmith and Jamias Ramsey are a couple guys I think that I like for them as well. But I think they'll go higher than what the Sixers or what the Sixers have at the draft. Brock, so you have the you have the video, you have the DeMarcus Cousins video. What else you got going on?
The Doc Rivers and Tobias Harris piece. I'm going to let you all know why you don't have to worry about Tobias Harris' contract for another year.
I like it.
Doc
I like
it to steer the ship in the right direction.
You know what's going to happen? You know what's going to happen is you'll put it out there, and then someone won't even watch the video. They'll just look at the title, and they'll be like, "No," because they already hate Tobias. They'll be like, "No."
Worst contract in the league. There's like 8 or 9 worst contracts in the league, and the Philadelphia Sixers have 2 of them.
Yeah, he is Landis Brock on Twitter. In real life, he is Brock Landis. I am Austin Krell. You can find me on Twitter at NBA Krell. We can talk about Furkan Korkmaz being a top 33 3-point shooter. Yep. You can talk about whatever you like. Happy to talk. As always, thank you for listening to the Feed to Embiid. We'll be back soon for another episode. Have a good night, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your Sunday. And we'll talk to you guys next time on the Feed to Embiid.